Okay,
Old Town.
yeah,
How you
yeah.
doing?
All right, good.
Could you tell me your name in relation to Irby?
Lane Vanderslice. I was one of the original founding members of IRPI from the University of Michigan that put out the call that made IRPI a national organization.
And that was in what year?
Well, we'd thought about it for a few years before, but we put out the call in '68, and it really got organized in 1968.
Lane, I should have said this to Al as well, but do try to rephrase the question in your answer if you can. Okay?
Oh, okay.
So how did you become interested in economics?
Well, um, I went to the University of Michigan in like the late '50s, and that was actually quite an interesting time because basically segregation was starting to come apart, but I mean, it was still very strong, and I just got interested in social. I got interested in social issues, but I was graduated when I was like 20 from Michigan, and I really did not know exactly what I did not know what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, I'm 20, I could take, this was On the Road with Jack Kerouac, that kind of stuff. I'll just hitchhike around take some time off and hitchhike around the country. Well, that was, if you had to pin one thing to it, I hitchhiked around the country. I mean, I worked in, construction in various places, including in a place called Elwood, Nebraska, which was, my middle name. So, my first name. So I was very popular in Elwood, Nebraska, and but eventually got out to the coast. And one of the, worked in worked in canneries. But one of the things I really did a lot, and along the way met a lot of interesting people, but a lot poorer than the people I'd been used to living with, even though we weren't very rich back in Detroit, Michigan. Um, so, but one of the things I did do quite a bit of was work as a migrant laborer, and that was really an eye opener. I mean, the conditions were really. This was like 1959. Conditions were very substandard, and I was just basically trying to, earn enough money to stay alive and, see the country at the same time. So one day in, where was it? It wasn't Modesto. It was Sunday, it was a day off, and I walked past the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, who was trying to organize the farm workers. So I stopped in to ask them how they were doing it. And basically, I got recruited to serve as an unpaid organizer. I was going to Fresno to hang out, and they said they needed an organizer in Fresno, California. So I did go down to Fresno, California, and it was really a bizarre scene. I mean, I had never seen anything like it before or really since. Uh, this was just when the mechanical cotton pickers had come in, but there was a vast migrant labor force, and there was like a central place in Fresno where there were buses that came with labor contractors and would pick up the workers who were basically poor whites or Chicanos, but not Chicano families. Like what they called them wetbacks then, or braceros. So, and then we would drive out into these cotton fields. I mean, these giant cotton fields. I've never seen fields so big before or since. And then we would pick cotton. Well, it was like 3 cents a pound. So, anyway, I got a really good education in poverty and trying to live on nothing a day and trying to organize. The people that I were working with were I did get them, not organized, but I did get them to contribute money to become a paid union member. But it was a very interesting experience.
So besides that experience, what led you to radical economics?
Well, what I decided was really what led me to radical economics. I don't think I was. radical economics did not exist when, I mean, it did exist as Marxist economics, and there were things like that. What I really wanted to do was, what came out of that is I wanted to really understand why people were poor. I mean, that seemed to me to be a useful question to ask, and economics was probably the best place to go study it. So I started as an economist actually at Wayne State University. And what made me more radical was really realizing that economics was not so much about, I mean, at that point, it really was not very much about poverty at all. I mean, it got more interested in it later on. But it was about mathematical economics. So, I got somewhat increasingly disenchanted, and disenchanted enough with at least one of the faculty members at Wayne State, although they were good, to go up to University of Michigan, where I met, many of the compatriots that are.
So how did you come to form the initial founders of IRPI?
Well, there was a lot going on. I mean, there was the SDS had a big chapter, the Students for Democratic Society. I mean, I actually knew, when I was an undergraduate, knew the founders of SDS. I mean, Tom Hayden, for example, worked on the paper with me. And Al Haber was another, very nice person who was there. But it was a lot of things went on. The IRPI, the economists who became the IRPI economists, but a group of us worked on anti-Vietnam demonstrations. We started a teachers union. A teaching fellows union, which had a lot of resistance. And this was also the era of the beginning of teach-ins, which at least the Michigan people think that they had a lot to do with starting. So there was a lot of things.
Teach-ins were about?
Teach-ins were about what they weren't telling you in school about the Vietnam War and and other social issues. And we were also trying to change the Michigan economics the department to take up more of these issues. So it was a lot of issues on the table then.
And could you give a brief summary of your involvement with IRPI over the years?
Well, we started it. I was the first, what I think we called national. We put out a call. Everybody came to Ann Arbor. People were agreed from 5 or 10 or 20, 15 different places that we should start a national organization. We had the first secretariat there. I was sort of the first national secretary, and we, basically started, sent out pamphlets and information to every, economics department in the country, and then got a giant amount of members back. And this was in '68, which was the riots in Chicago, and the AEA was supposed to meet in Chicago. So we tried to foment, and did foment, with other people, of course, a shift to an alternate site in Philadelphia. That's where the first sort of IRPI national meeting, out.
So you're currently a member of the steering committee, but you were a member from the early years.
There was no steering committee, and in fact, after about, I went to Bolivia 3 or 5 months after March of 1969. So I missed out on a lot of the early IRPI occasions because I was in Bolivia for 3 years.
And what are some of the main activities you've done, either with economics or as an activist over the years?
Well, I thought that, in terms of economics, I tried to get the notion of harm more, and how societies harm other people into economics, and I would say failed completely. So I think that still needs to be done. I did learn a lot in Bolivia, and then when I left academic economics, I went to work for an organization called Bread for the World, which basically did lobbying for poor people. And there, I mean, I think well, I don't, let me start saying them. There's two or three things. Basically, we've started something called the Child Survival Fund because I really did discover in Latin America that kids were dying. I mean, a good friend of mine who was a campesino son died, who was my son's age. So, and when I started asking around the village, just inquire, was this what what was it like? There were kids dying of like preventable diseases. So when I got back to when I started in Washington as a lobbyist for Bread for the World, I was able to start something called the Child Survival Fund, and really do a vast increase in funding over the years. And also the first debt forgiveness bill for developing countries.
And you also work around issues of hunger today.
Yes, so, and now, I mean, I think the third thing to say would be for the last 19 years, I've basically put out first a print publication and then a web publication on hunger in the world, hunger and poverty in the world.
What's the name of the organization?
The organization is called World Hunger Education Service.
How would you assess IRPI over the years in terms of being successful or as a failure in your mind?
Well, I mean, the big success is that we've continued to be in an organization and continued to struggle. So that's certainly a success. As you know, one of the things that I've tried to do since I've come on the board, as you know from our meetings and stuff, is really try to get us to reach out more to non-economists or not, at a higher level of academics, but undergraduates, for example.
So, what do you see as some of the major advances of IRPI and limitations?
Well, I mean, we've published a journal for 40 years and gotten stuff out there and in other forums that would not have otherwise been there. So I think that's a major thing to do. We've kept up the struggle. I mean, I think we're falling back. I mean, for whatever reason, our deficiencies or the strength of the opposition, we've fallen back a bit in terms of. I mean, one of our jokes was when we started the organization. I mean, there was one group of us, and the shorthand for did we want to start a national organization was, can there be revolution in one department? So, and I think that's still a relevant question today, and still what we're struggling for.
Playing on the concept of can there be revolution in one country?
Yes.
How would you describe the situation today in general regarding radical economics and its prospects?
The short answer for me is I don't know. I mean, I have not really. In some ways, I'm as what people think of as a radical economist. I'm not an economist, an academic economist. I think there's I think there's a lot of people that are struggling out there to make changes, and it may not fit our. I mean, if you're dealing with Congress or something like that, all these changes are, you're pushing against something, and you make an incremental and a small incremental change. But I think that's can be a very radical thing to do. So I think there's a lot of people out there working and willing to change. So I'm not optimistic totally, but I mean I think there are good reasons for optimism.
Is there any other story of an experience with IRPI that you'd like to share with us? Anecdote that strikes you or you recall?
No, I don't think so.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Wait, hold on, one second.
So I cut it,
What?
I was cutting it short because of, we're approaching 6.
Oh.
Yeah,
what
we-
you got?
I know
Okay.
we need time to wrap up.
All right.
Sorry.
You're right.
No, that's fine. That's good. I mean,